1. Blog Talk Radio.
Episode 805. I'm your host, Dan Clemency, your constitutional warrior fighting for your right just to be an American. It is May 23rd in the year of our Lord 2017. Remember, we are a hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control. He does love you. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios here in the beautiful central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. And our heartfelt condolences go out to the Roger Moore family. If you hadn't heard the news already, because everything's being overshadowed by the terrorist attack in London right now, Sir Roger Moore, better known as James Bond, and he also played in some earlier roles. Simon Templeton was one of his characters he played, but most people know him best as James Bond, 007, License to Kill. He lost his battle with cancer. He was 89 when he passed away here earlier this morning over in Switzerland. So they're a few hours ahead of us over there. So our condolences go out to the Roger Moore family. And I just want to read this quote of his that I found in the Wikipedia. It says, "Teach love, generosity, good manners, and some of that will drift from the classroom to the home, and who knows, the children will be educating the parents." And honestly, folks, I think these things need to be taught at home as well as in school. If they're not being taught at home, they definitely should be taught at school so they can be brought home. And he's going to be, Roger Moore's going to be sorely missed as an actor. I can say this, and I know Roger Moore knows this a lot. In my mind, in my opinion, he was of the old, before they rebooted him with Pierce Brosnan, of the older James Bond, he was my second favorite. Of course, Sean Connery was my first, and then Roger Moore, and then was it Lindsay was the other one in Her Majesty's Secret Service, and he only played one. He only had one movie, and he claims they offered him, and there's a little documentary out about this on Netflix, I think it is, or Hulu. I think it's Hulu. Where he claims that he was offered 6 more movies. I don't know why he didn't do them. He was pretty good, Lindsay was, in Her Majesty's Secret Service. But Roger Moore, he was more the suave, debonair spy. Of course, Sean Connery, James Bond. I do a bad impersonation of Sean Connery. In my mind, he'll always be the best James Bond. I think Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig have done a fantastic job of filling the role. I hear tell that Daniel Craig's not going to do any more James Bond movies, and that's a shame because I think he was really good. He's a really good actor, and I thought he was really good with James Bond. I think he brought a depth of character that I don't think Sean Connery or Roger Moore could bring, and I think Daniel Craig more so than Pierce Brosnan. Pierce Brosnan was more in the vein of, in my mind, of Roger Moore with a little more action, but Pierce Brosnan was very suave and debonair, also like Roger Moore, but his action was a little bit more believable than Roger Moore's. But Daniel Craig, I think he sort of embodied the whole James Bond genre, as it were. So that's something, people die all the time. I know I don't talk about a lot of people that pass away on the show here, but, because maybe they're not my favorite. I don't know. Or, they're not somebody I grew up with. I grew up with Roger Moore. I did. Now, real quick here, you'll see in the background, you can see more of the office in the background. So I'm definitely going to have to tighten in the video here. But what happened was I didn't have some settings done correctly on my open broadcaster. And so I have those set right because I've been actually working, and this is good news for the show, folks. I'm at the point now where I'm sort of in the beta testing point now. I got everything set up on the open broadcaster with Skype using a program called Manycams. And basically what Manycams does is it takes your webcam and turns it into a virtual cam, and you can use it in different applications. Now, I haven't yet went to just one webcam here with Manycams and applied that to every instance on my open broadcast, although I think I can. I was doing it last night. It seemed to work fine, so we may end up going back that way with that. But right now I have two webcams up there, one with this shot here, and then when I start doing interviews and that, I'll have a second webcam set up that does the virtual, hooks into Skype and everything. And so hopefully that'll work. My only limitation is going to be my CPU on my big computer here. So we may end up, not right away because that's an expense I just don't want to foot right now, but we may end up getting a third computer for the broadcast studio and house just open broadcaster on that particular computer that goes to the streaming computer. So I'm not sure how we're going to have everything hooked up here with that. More than likely what'll happen is I'll do the show on the broadcast computer and have that all set up because it'll be stronger, and then my music and some other stuff will actually go through the second computer, my original computer, into the soundboard and be picked up. I'm not sure exactly how that's all going to work. I've actually been doing some studying on control rooms. I think I pretty well got the podcast area here set up with the show. I got a few more tweaks I need to do. I got to put some sound treatment on the wall in front of me, and I want to put some sound treatment up above me to try to, because I still get this little bit of an echo in here because it is a hard room. There's not a lot on the walls to actually absorb, and actually most everything except for the I got a dartboard sitting straight in front of me that actually would probably not reflect the sound as bad. So there's a few things I want to finish up in the room here to make it a little bit better for what I'm doing now. Lord willing, the creeks don't rise sometime in the future. I hope to expand the show and possibly maybe even be able to move into a different studio down the line. Lord only knows about that. I know that my buddy Dave doesn't do the things he does with this show as far as his critiques and everything. I'm not going to go into the whole thing. I just want to acknowledge and thank Dave for bringing some things to my attention on the show that I wasn't thinking about as being detrimental to the show or being, trying, to help me grow my audience. And it did surprise me when I started looking over the demographics of the show, who was listening to the show, the genres, not the genres, the genders. Genres are different type of movies, and I had that in my head thinking of James Bond. The different genders. And I know people might get mad at this, and that's on them, not on me. When it comes to demographics, I only look at two genders because that's, in my mind, there's only two. There's male and female. That's it. And then I look at the age groups, and it did surprise me. I do have a decent following. 22% of the folks that are actually watching videos on YouTube, and these are all YouTube stats, 22% of them are between 25 and 34. I was like, wow. That's a good demographic to be in. It's the younger crowds, 22%. My biggest listeners as far as demographics is 55 to 65. That's my biggest, 49%. And I do appreciate everybody that listens to the show. We were talking about ways that we were going to try to get things not geared to the younger folks, but to try to entice them into sitting down and listening to what I'm talking about, what I have to say with my Christian political commentary. And so this show's always forever evolving. It really is, folks. I'm with getting into video. If you notice along the bottom of the video here, it's I have my name and VidMe, support me at Patreon, subscribe. That's going throughout the show. I've gotten Dave seems to like it. But other folks that's seen that, it doesn't distract. It's small enough it doesn't distract from the show, and they kind of like it on there too. They do like my overlays that I actually have been doing. I'm like I said, I'm getting set up for for Skype interviews, which is another aspect of the show that hopefully helps grow the show. So today's show. It's not being brought to you by Rocky Mountain High Brands, but it is. I'm just letting you know that it is the official drink of the Dan Clements Show. And right now I have on my desktop, and I got to crack this open because I am a little thirsty and keep my whistle wet throughout the show. I have the coconut and lime energy drink that's low calorie. It means it's low in sugar. And I do kind of like that. Some people didn't particularly care for that taste, but I kind of like the taste of that. And it's all their products are made with natural stuff. No high fructose corn syrup. All the sugars that they use in the other ones are natural sugars that actually occur in nature. You don't have to go through a chemical process to get to them, like you do with high fructose corn syrup or any type of corn syrup. And full disclosure, I do own stocks in them in my retirement portfolio. So. Go out and buy a lot of Rocky Mountain High Brand. Help me out. Help my retirement out, please. Today's daily Bible reading comes from the book of Psalms, chapter 103, verses 9 through 12. He will not always strive with us, nor will he keep his anger forever. He has not dealt with us according to our sins, nor punished us according to our iniquities. For as the heavens are high above the earth, so great is his mercy towards those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us. This is talking about David the psalmist here is talking about a gracious God, a merciful God that we actually worship, that actually does exist, and there's more than adequate proof, not evidence, proof that God actually exists. Quote meal today comes from Richard Parker. God doesn't call people who are qualified. He calls people who are willing, and then he qualifies them. I love it. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to folks or heard stories of people talking with folks that they just didn't feel they were good enough to be a Christian. They didn't qualify to be a Christian, and that's not what God wants. God wants people who are willing, and then he'll qualify them through his word. Today's short Bible lesson actually comes from, and it'll be in my show notes page, and one of my listeners, Paul, asked me, where's your show notes page? Well, just think of the Dan Clements Show and then put a .com behind it. Real easy to get to, and if that is something that you forget, which we all do, go to the YouTube video and scroll down through the notes below that, and there's actually a link in there for the DanClementsShow.com, and I try to put up the show notes every day. Yesterday's was up a little bit late last night. I was going to do it right after supper, and then the Manchester, England thing literally and figuratively and physically blew up yesterday evening, so I want to talk a little bit about that. So it's called Motes and Beams by Foy Forehand. And this is a sermon outline based on Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 6, talking about judge not lest you be judged. And it goes through and breaks that whole thing down, because a lot of people like to zero in on the first verse and forget about everything else that goes beyond that. And you know what we always say here about context. Context is king. And we have to keep Matthew chapter 7, verse 1 in context with the other verses that talk about judgment. And it's not the only section of Scripture that talks about judgment. Okay, if you're living in a cave, I hope you're not, there was a terrorist attack. ISIS has claimed responsibility for this, and they are, last night, the initial reports last night that 19 people were killed and 50 people were injured. Now there's 22 confirmed deaths in this terrorist attack, and 59 people that were injured, including 12 under the age of 16. If you don't know, they were there at Manchester. I call it a Coliseum, but they call it a center arena, Manchester Arena. They say it holds approximately 18,000 folks, but there was reports that there was upwards of 21,000 people there. Now they're talking about 18,000 in the bleachers. And then, they have the floor that they can actually host people. And this was a Arena Grande concert that was going on over there. U.S. pop star was having a concert over there, and she has a lot of fans over in the U.K. And a lot of pop stars in the U.S. have a lot of fans worldwide. But my point is, Andrea Grande, I didn't look up her age, but she's very young. And so there was a lot of young women there. I would probably venture to say most of the girls and some of the guys there were, taking their girlfriends to the concert. Of course, I don't know if I've actually heard any of her songs, but she seems to be pretty decent. She has a good following there. But we're 20 or younger, in their 20s or younger there. So this attack was on helpless youth that hadn't done anything wrong to anybody. As far as ISIS is concerned, ISIS doesn't care. We're going to talk about fundamental versus radical on the show today, and the problem with ISIS, and the problem with folks the anti-freedom folks in this country that are the social justice warriors that freaked out when President Donald Trump put that executive order out, which was following federal law, cited all the federal laws we went over this weeks ago, if not months ago, on the show here, and we talked about how it cited federal law, and it didn't create any extra laws. It didn't legislate any new powers. It just said we're going to enforce these laws, and the anti-freedom folks in this country just went apey on that. They went out of their minds. They freaked out. And all we got to do, and I've said this before, all we got to do is look over to Europe, and especially the United Kingdom, and if we go the way they go with these refugees, and we don't plug our southern border, if we don't secure our country from these radicals. And when it comes to Islam, what they're doing, these ISIS fighters, and this was a suicide bomber. I guess there's some arrests been made already this morning. This is not one of these news shows where we got breaking up to the minute news on it, where I'm a commentator on the news that's happening. And they think it was a nail bomb, and the suicide bomber killed himself. There was another package, a suspicious package there, and they blew that up. I didn't see any reports on that before I got into the show today. There may be some reports out there that some people are further ahead on this than I am. But getting back to ISIS and the caliphate and all these terrorist attacks, these attacks that are you either convert or die, killing of Christians around the world, killing other Muslims who don't necessarily agree with the fundamental, and this is a key point, folks. If you read the Quran, And I haven't read it word for word. I've read enough of it and enough of the passages in context, because like I said, I'm contextual, so I read the passages before and after the death passages in the Quran. The problem with the Quran is it's all broken up. It's not like the Bible where it's actually telling a story. Now the Bible may not be in chronological order, but when you read through a book, it doesn't skip around in that book. But the only one I can think of that kind of skips around is Nehemiah. But it seems like when Nehemiah is going through and writing this, or he's going through and talking to the children of Israel as they're rebuilding Jerusalem and the temple, that he breaks out in prayer. So it does get a little random that way, but not like the Quran does. The Quran is segregated. It is trying to keep things in context is hard to do, because the verses, from verse to verse, they actually skip, from this topic to that topic to that topic. So it is, in that regard, the Quran is segmented that way. They have the verses separated out. So it's kind of hard to keep things in context. But if you read those, what people call the death verses, that is fundamental to Islam. Now, the social justice tyrants out there who support the refugees, support Islam, the feminists that support Islam, that one I still ain't got figured out. I'm still kind of scratching my head on that one because of the oppression of women in the Islamic world. But all these folks that support Islam, they ignore these passages. And they call these, literally, those in the news, in the mainstream media, these are just radical Muslims, radical Islamists. And they have nothing to do with the moderate Islamists. And I think quite the contrary. If you read through the Quran and you read the verses, and folks, Jihad Watch, should put this down. I'll link Jihad Watch by Robert Spencer. It's a website. They have Islam 101 on there. He does a good job of going through explaining Islam. Pamela Geller is another one. I'll make a note of that. Pamela Geller, I follow her on Facebook and Twitter. She's another one that tracks all this stuff. The Rubin Report had a lady on there, Gabriella, and I can't pronounce her last name, but her first name is Gabriella. She grew up in Lebanon. She wasn't a Muslim. She was a Christian, but she grew up in that culture, and she's over here in the United States, and she talks a lot about this. I'll try to find Gabriella and link it. I'll try to get all three of these links not only in the show notes page, but also on the YouTube below. But they talk about these folks explain Islam. And these verses, what they call these death verses, are fundamental. They're part of the pillars of Islam. That makes them fundamental. So they're not radical. What would be radical is a departure from those verses. Them verses. Them bones, them bones, them bones. Anyway, they would be radical to the verses that are found in the Quran, those that are moderate, those that don't practice those things when it comes to Islam. So they're not being radical Islamic terrorists. They're fundamental Islamic terrorists, and they're being true to the tenets of their religion. It's not a religion of peace, folks. It really isn't. And we have a man that we've been supporting in our congregation. His first name's Wissam. He's coming to deliver a series of lessons on Islam, how Christ looks at Islam, or how the Bible looks at Islam. I'm looking forward to that. I'm trying to get with the guys at church to. We won't be able to live broadcast it because we're not set up in the building. I can't take this stuff portable over there and get everything set up to do that. I'm not set up to do portable. I could do a live podcast. I could get on a Blog Talk Radio and do that, but we're going to record the audio, and I'm also going to take one of my webcams over there and set it up, and we're going to record video for it also. And I'm going to record all the sessions of that, and I don't know, I'm going to leave it up to the church. I have no way of burning DVDs for that. I think it would probably be easier for us just to send those off to somebody, the video files, video and audio files, and actually have somebody make the DVDs for that for us. And I'm not even sure if someone's actually hasn't contacted a local videographer to record this. So I'm still, I got to check my emails and see if anybody got back with me on that. But I think this is important. I think Wissam's going to do, I think he's going to do a really good job. I've heard him a couple times before. He does a really good job explaining what Islam is and the difference between Islam and Christianity. And my problem with the whole anti-freedom group out there, the social justice tyrants and the progressives who see nothing wrong with Islam, and I've told you before on the show, I think the reason why they like Islam is the control that Islam has over the countries it's in. You know, it's Islam is a state religion. It's a very violent religion, but Sharia law controls the government all the way down to the poorest person in the country. And so that control appeals to the anti-freedom groups. And the anti-freedom folks that are in the Democrat Party and the social justice tyrants that are out there. That appeals to them, that control. So it's not a wonder that they may not like ISIS, but they like the whole idea of Sharia law, and they like the whole idea of controlling the country from top to bottom. I would liken these folks to pre-Revolutionary War England and Europe, and how the despots over there, through the church, the state-created church, the state-sponsored church, controlled the masses, to the point where England was hunting down a gentleman named Tisdale who dared print the Bible in English so the common person could read it. How dare you? How dare you? They hunted this guy mercilessly. I mean, with bulldog tenacity, they hunted this person down, this Tisdale. And he'd be a good subject for you to go research in history. And this is how these countries controlled the masses. They controlled the folks through religion. I mean, this is what, and I don't have the quote at my fingertips. I remember reading it years ago about the Roman Empire. And they saw Christianity was on the rise. And folks, Romans, if nothing else, they were good record keepers. And they knew what was going on in their provinces. And Paul the Apostle was going through all through their area, you know, Asia Minor, you know, all the places he went to, Galatia and Philippi and the Ephesians, Thessalonians, all these folks. And he was in Rome for a while. They knew what was going on here. The Roman Empire wasn't stupid. They knew what was going on religiously. And I believe it was Constantine who was baptized into Christ. We're not, history shows his baptism wasn't of immersion, but, you know, that's another whole story. But I'm pretty sure it was Constantine who talked about in order to control the masses, we need to control their religion. Because before Christianity came about, they controlled the false gods, you know, like Zeus or you know, whoever the Roman gods were. And I know I'm mixing up my Roman gods and my Greek gods. But that's not my point here. They controlled the religion, or the people, through their religion. And they saw that Christianity was actually displacing all these false gods of the Romans and the Greeks. And so Constantine got out ahead of it and wanted to try to control the people through their religion. And therefore you had the birth of, and I know I'm going to be contradicted by a lot of people, but you had the birth of the Roman Catholic Church. And its hierarchy set up identical to what the old Roman Empire was set up with the Senate and all, you know, just all the similarities are just too striking to say that's a coincidence. Okay. But so they wanted to control the religion, and this is what the anti-freedom folks in this country would like to do. They would like to see a religion come into the country that they erroneously think they can control. These guys are so intellectually elite that they think with their brain power they can control anything. And they know They know in their heart of hearts, and they know in their minds, in the deepest recesses of their minds, that there's no way you're going to control Christianity. It doesn't work that way. You know, the Church of Christ, the church that's spoken of in the New Testament, does not have an earthly headquarters. There's a lot of denominations that call themselves Christians, but you need to compare them to what the Bible says. You need to compare their teachings to what the Bible teaches. You need to compare their structure and setup to what the Bible teaches. And if you do that honestly, you'll find that a lot of denominations don't add up. They absolutely do not adhere to the Bible whatsoever. I'm not saying whatsoever, but in enough aspects, they do not adhere to the Bible to where you can't call them Christians. You can't call them Christian churches, although a lot of people recognize them as that. And so in a very fundamental way, you could call me a fundamentalist when it comes to the New Testament, it comes to scriptures. But there's people out there that look at the Church of Christ as being radical. Oh, you guys are radical. You guys are, and to the point that we're called a cult. To the point that the Church of Christ is called a cult. But I challenge people on this. I really do. I have in the past, and I will continue to do so in the future. When someone throws out that accusation, I ask them to please prove that. How is the Church of Christ a cult? And it's never done with the Bible. It's always done, well, you're not in the mainstream of things. You're not, what you say isn't in the mainstream, like with baptism and salvation, is not in the mainstream Christendom thought. But I go back to the Bible, so what's the Bible say? And in my experience, I know this is anecdotal, but or it's an analogy. It's just stories in my life that I can point to and say, hey, this didn't happen with me. 9 times out of 10, they will not go back to the scriptures, and if they do, they're ripping things out of context to prove their point. And like I said, with me, context is king. So we have this terrorist attack in England. Anybody with a minimum of common sense and reason could tell you, because of the refugees that are flowing into Europe and England, that this was going to happen. The past is prologue to the future. Here in America, we see what's happening in Europe. We see what's happening in places like Sweden. You know, how the attacks are coming, not daily, but a lot. And here's a country that open arms with the refugees. A lot of European countries are the same way, and they're finding out that really wasn't a good idea. And we can learn. So we should be able to learn from Europe. We should be able to say, hey, we don't want this happening here. So we need to fight against this, and we need to call it what it is. What's fundamental to the Christian religion is 180 degrees out as far as being the religion of peace and being peaceful and freedom-loving and liberty-loving, things like that, over Islam, which it's not, like I said, they have fundamental things to their doctrine that's in the Quran, and it's not radical. What would be radical to a fundamental Islamist or a fundamental Muslim, or a Muslim who follows the fundamental teachings? I'm going to use this word, the word of the day is fundamental. If you are moderate in your views of this, if you don't think it's right to go around killing people, convert or die, the honor killings with your daughters, the way they treat women and stuff like that, then to a Muslim who practices the fundamental pillars of Islam, you're the radical. You're the infidel, and you need to be taken care of. And trust me, folks, in the Muslim world, they kill more Muslims than they do Christians. It's bad enough they kill, quote-unquote, Christians, but they kill far more Muslims who are moderate or even secular. So that's a problem in the world. So when you're talking about fundamental versus radical, you need to define your terms, and everything needs to be taken in context. Because like I said, what's fundamental to New Testament Christianity is radical to the rest of Christendom, the denominational world out there that claims to be Christians, that claims to be following the New Testament in patterns of worship, pattern of salvation, the whole 9 yards. And so, like I said, we need to define our terms. President Trump called them evil losers, and to a certain extent they are, but you know what? We need to start addressing the problem head on. And I still have not heard anything from the government, politicians, Trump, whoever, who talks the way I've been talking about, fundamental versus radical. And again, what the ISIS is doing is fundamental to the Islamic faith. Just read the book, folks. Read the book. Or at least go study it. Whether you want to read the Quran or not, it's up to you. But at least go to like Jihad Watch and take their class on Islam 101. They'll walk you through these things, and you can go. I have a PDF of a Quran, and you can just search that on my computer. It's searchable, readable, and I've been trying to read through it. And like I said, it's very broken up, so it's hard. It's not a real fluent. The reading doesn't flow, as it were. So that's going on. That's going to continue to go on. We might talk about this a little bit more tomorrow. I want to talk about something that wasn't in the news, but everything's being overshadowed by yesterday and today's events with over Manchester. And I have 3 articles here about the Supreme Court rejects North Carolina congressional district map. Now, I reported last week Supreme Court declined to hear a case about the voter ID. So the lower court's standing is still there. Now, that doesn't mean that it's over. They can actually, because the Supreme Court didn't hear it, doesn't mean it's over. They can resubmit for a hearing at the Supreme Court these cases were all decided without Judge Gorsuch, this was all done prior to him taking a seat on the Supreme Court of the United States. So Neil Gorsuch is how it's pronounced, Gorsuch. But Justice Gorsuch wasn't sitting during these, so it's an eight-judge panel at the Supreme Court level there. And the one thing I want to point out here in all this, let me find the right article here. All right, this one comes from westernjournalism.com. Supreme Court rules that North Carolina illegally gerrymandered congressional districts based on race, and this is by Andrew Kerr, Kerr, on May 22nd of this year. A precedent of this court should not be treated like, and it's in parentheses, and I'll go down through the article here that he writes. The Supreme Court ruled Monday that North Carolina illegally gerrymandered 2 congressional districts along racial lines. The 5-3 ruling affirmed the decision of a lower court, which in 2016 ruled that North Carolina officials packed additional black voters into districts already heavily represented by African Americans. Conservative Justice Clarence Thomas joined ranks with the liberal justices to provide the deciding vote in the case. Thomas, one of the Supreme Court's most conservative judges, has said for decades that he believes congressional districting based on racial lines is unconstitutional no matter what side of the political aisles you benefits. And I agree with him. We should not be drawing district lines because of race. Neither should we be drawing district lines, and it's called gerrymandering. And the biggest one, the best one I know of was Barney Franks in his district. If you go back and Google this, when Barney Franks was in Congress and he was up from Boston, and you look at his district, it looks like a snake going through and around Boston. It really does. And if you look at all the voters in those districts, the vast majority, I don't know what percentage of them were, the vast majority of them were liberal. And so, that gerrymandering benefited a political bias. And folks, as far as I'm concerned, when redistricting happens, it should not be at the state political level. It really shouldn't. They should put together a citizen blue ribbon panel, I don't care what it is, and have it represent not only, and you have to do this, but not only represent different races, but different political biases, not just the 2 major party ones. I think they should have constitutionalists on it like I am, a libertarians on the thing, and then whatever the recommendation that comes out of that should be recommended to the state legislature, and they should adopt that and not try to further gerrymander the whole districts. Okay. The article goes on, Justice Samuel Alito and John Roberts and attorney Anthony Kennedy dissented. Justice Neil Gorsuch absent from issuing the vote in this case, and I told you why, because he wasn't there. Hang on a second. I hate it when these articles are laced with these, see these advertisements for this, or see the advertisement below. I didn't take them out because I didn't have time. Supreme Court found that North Carolina's 1st and 12th districts were packed with African Americans to provide a political advantage to Republicans. Justice Elena Kagan said it was clear that the race played a critical role in both North Carolina's districts were drawn. The state map makers purposely established a racial target, Kagan wrote in the court's ruling decision. A state may not use as the prominent factor in drawing district lines, the state may not use race as the prominent factor in drawing district lines unless it has a compelling reason, she wrote, citing the Constitution, which she said forbids a state from separating its citizens into different voting districts on the basis of race. North Carolina, in its defense, said they were trying to preserve the black majority in the districts to comply with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which protects racial minorities. In his partial dissent, Alito wrote that the court should have relied on a precedent set by a 2001 Supreme Court decision that rejected what he considered a remarkably similar challenge to North Carolina's 12th district. A precedent of this court should not be treated like a disposable household item, say a paper plate or napkin, to be used once and then tossed in the trash, Alito wrote. But that is what the court does today in this decision regarding North Carolina's 12th congressional district. The court junks a rule adopted in a prior remarkably similar challenge to this very same congressional district. The ruling will not have an effect on North Carolina's current districting. The state was required to redraw its districts lines in 2016 after the federal court overturned its gerrymandered state lines. Republicans won 10 of the state's 13 seats with the redrawn lines in the 2016 elections. But I want to go back to this, and this is something that they're missing over at Mother Jones, Slate Salon, Huffington Post, Washington Post, New York Times. This actual article came out of westernjournalism.com. I have a couple other articles. Washington Free Beacon, I think, is one of them. But anyway, was the precedent that was set back in 2001 that if you go back and do the research, the districting was based on this 2001 Supreme Court ruling. And even back then, this ruling, and some people try to tell you this amounts to like the Dred Scott case or segregation or slavery. Even before the Civil War, the Supreme Court upheld slavery. Those precedents were, in my opinion, null and void because they denied people the freedom and their liberties based on their race. But this 2001 Supreme Court decision is what North Carolina was basing their redistricting on, as far as I can find out. But now, with our liberal Supreme Court up there, that wasn't the case. And quite honestly, it was a 5-3 decision. I'm just wondering if Judge Neil Gorsuch was there. I'll get his name right sooner or later. If he was there, if he might not have swayed some other jurist on the Supreme Court to go the other way. And not that I'm surprised at Clarence Thomas, went this way, but I am surprised that he would set aside that earlier Supreme Court decision. And I haven't yet read the dissenting opinions or the opinions in the affirmation of the decision. So I'm still trying to wing my way through those, as it were, and just get a better sense of what's going on there. But this is part of a bigger picture here, folks, with voting. The anti-freedom folks out there, they want things in such a way, especially after the 2016 presidential elections, they want things in such a way that this electoral landslide never happens again. And what they're saying by doing this is that the forgotten men and women in the United States should remain they should remain forgotten. They shouldn't matter in these votes. If if the Democrats and the anti-freedom folks out there and the Hillary Clinton campaign had their way, it would only be the two coasts, the East Coast and West Coast, that would be deciding the elections in the United States, and everybody in flyover country, including me, wouldn't matter at all. And I want to throw a wrinkle into this whole thing. This with these elections, I've said this before, and I'll stand by this. I do not like the winner takes all, and I'm working, not diligently, but I'm sending emails to my state representative and senator that we need to get rid of this winner takes all. And the response I got back this like a year ago was, well, if we do that, then we're not going to be a swing state anymore. And I'm like, what are you talking about? We have enough. I think it's 55. Maybe I'm not really. I have to go back and research the numbers on this, but we have enough electoral votes in Pennsylvania still that it would behoove candidates to come here and fight for them. But I do not believe that if you take the majority of electoral votes in a state that you should get all the ones even though you didn't win those. So this is part of a bigger picture of, I believe, the anti-freedom folks in their voter suppression. They're jury rigging the vote. They're trying to basically manhandle the vote in the states where voter ID laws, they're trying to fight voter ID laws at every step. And to me, on any level, that's a common sense, reasonable action to take, that everybody that's eligible to vote, every state is proposing voter ID laws. I have not seen one yet that hasn't also put provisions in there. If you can't afford one, we'll pay for it. Taxpayers pay for it. I'm happy to do that. I said before, in my congressional district here, as much as I'm able to, because it's a big district, but if I take some time out of my day to help somebody go get a state ID so they can go vote, I'll do that. And then I'll try to make arrangements to help them go vote if they can't, don't have a car or whatever to go vote. Most of the time when I vote down here in our town, I walk. It's down around the corner. So this concerted effort from the anti-freedom crowd, to me, and this is just part of it here, this redistricting. And folks, I don't like redistricting the way it's done now any more than any other constitutional loving citizen in the United States, because I think there's too much hanky-panky going on when it comes to the redistricting. So I had to put that out. I just wanted to put that out there, that I don't like the way redistricting is done now. I think it should be taken out of the political realm of the legislatures. I think they should set up some type of citizen panel, and it has to be not large, but it should be broad enough. City, country, black, red, black, and white, they're precious in His sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world. Just across the political scope, the cultural scope, the ethnic scope, and the racial scope. Sit down with the commission and say, look, we need to redraw these districts because of population. And honestly, it's not that hard. I don't think it's that hard. You see a town, and you see several towns in a county, and you need to break one off to make one more equal than the other. There shouldn't be any, well, this is a predominantly black neighborhood, we should protect this or that. It should be, look, these are American citizens that live here, these are American citizens that live here. We need to take some of them from here and put them over in this district to balance these districts out. And it shouldn't matter what the race is. I think it should matter more about geography than it does race or ethnicity or politics or anything. And I think it could be done real easily myself. That's just me. Maybe I'm overthinking this or simplifying it too much. But that could be the case. Now, a couple more things here before we get to the end. I don't think we're going to get to Trump's budget. There's even though he's on this trip and this terrorist attack has happened, they're still grumbling on Capitol Hill about the proposed Trump budget. Now, these are only suggestions. The president cannot say this is what the budget's going to be, because guess where it goes? It goes to the House, where all these spending bills are supposed to constitutionally originate. So they have to go to the House. They're already grumbling in the House. There's a lot of grumblings, mostly on the Democrat side of the aisle than the Republican, but there are Republicans that are saying that the proposed cuts that President Trump wants in his proposal are too deep. Too deep. For crying out loud tonight time. Too deep. We have a $4 trillion a year budget, which is way overinflated. We're hovering around $20 trillion in fiscal operating debt. That means just to get us through the year, this is how much debt we piled up over the years since the beginning of the country. We're in debt $20 trillion. That's like somebody that has, and this is, I don't know what the percentage is. I'm just giving you an example. That's like somebody with a credit card balance in their financial portfolio or in their, I can't remember what their balance sheets anyway. Having $100,000 in credit card debt and not bringing enough money in between, let's say it's a married couple, between the two of them to service that debt. And that's what the national debt is, $20 trillion. We can't service it. I think 7% of the $4 trillion budget goes just paying interest on that $20 trillion worth of debt. So somebody out there like the Federal Reserve and these banks like the Federal Reserve system are making a killing. They're literally, and this is something we have to dig into eventually as Americans, about the Fed. The Fed is making money. Why? The Fed is making money off of our debt. How did that happen? 1913 was the Federal Reserve Charter that was passed along with the 16th and 17th Amendment. I honestly, folks, if the 17th Amendment hadn't been passed, I think the Federal Reserve Charter would have been gone a long time ago. I think the states through the Senate would have got rid of that a long time ago, my personal opinion. But, his President Trump and the budgets and everything that's going on, we haven't had, and I've checked, we haven't had an actual budget almost through the whole Obama administration. And now you hear cries from those folks in the anti-freedom crowd, the Democrat Party, and that saying, well, we need to have a spending bill. We need to have a budget. I'm thinking, where was their urgency when, like, Harry Reid was the president of the Senate, or the Senate Majority Leader, not the president, Senate Majority Leader in the Senate, where everything is a continuing resolution, has been. And quite honestly, folks, I don't like these omnibus spending bills. Everything's packed into one bill, quite honestly. I'm a firm believer, one issue, one bill, voted up or down, send it up the line. One issue, one bill, and that's exactly how the committee should handle it. They should, especially the Ways and Means or whoever's in charge of putting these bills out, depending on where it's coming from. One bill, one issue, no amendments, get it out to the floor, vote it up or down, send it up the line, or send it back to committee. That's, in my way of thinking, that's the way it should be handled. So this is something that's going to be on the horizon here with Trump and everything that's going on there. Now, sort of getting back to my theme about fundamental versus radical. If you didn't know, Notre Dame on Sunday had their graduation and commencement. And CNN was showing a video, surprise, surprise, and they weren't the only ones, but and this isn't a surprise to me, they edited the video, and especially the sound of the video. You didn't hear hardly any sounds while these a big, not a vast majority, but quite a few in number got up and walked out because Mike Pence was giving the commencement speech. And they're, as predicted, Mike Pence made us feel unsafe. As a snowflake, let's just go over the corner and melt because someone's saying something we may not agree with, so it makes us feel unsafe. Folks, these students should have. If they don't, then there's something wrong with the business world today. But these students going out in the real world, I think, are going to have a rude awakening. Because there's going to be a lot of times in their life that things are said far worse. And I listened to the speech, and not that I agreed with everything Mike Pence said, but I listened to the speech, and there was nothing in her, in my opinion, to make anybody uncomfortable, to make anybody have to go find their safe space. I do know in the business world today, because of the company I was with at Mohawk Flush Doors, they're part of a multinational company, Masonite Incorporate, that they were going through some things. And to me, I even told my direct supervisor this. I was tardy a couple times. So, and it rose to the level, and some of them were my fault. Things got in my way, and other things I was trying to get some things done, like with my prescriptions. Twice I was at the pharmacy and held the pharmacy for 40 minutes trying to get a prescription I needed. And I called into work, and even though I called in, I was still tardy. I had to write a letter explaining my tardiness, explaining how that's not going to happen again. I had to write a letter. I wrote the letter. I was sincere in it. I'm not saying, let's put it this way. I was sincere in my wording, so I wouldn't lose my job. But I thought it was a joke. I really did. I thought it was a joke. And I even told my direct supervisor, who was in the job I was in, I had a group leader, but they really didn't know what was going on. And my direct supervisor was a shift supervisor, and he knew what was going on. I reported mainly directly to him. I gave him the letter and everything. He sent up the line. Everything was kosher with HR and everything like that. And I come back and told him, I said, you know what? And I said, you want to fire me for saying this? You can fire me. But I told him, I thought that letter was a total joke. And he kind of looked at me like, what do you mean? And I said, I long for the days. I long for the days. If I did something wrong, that my supervisor would get me in an office by myself. Don't do it in front of everybody, but get me in an office in private between me and him, and start at my left foot, start chewing me up one side, down the other, and end up at my right foot. Just start chewing me out, and threatening my job the whole 9 yards. I said, I long for those days. And he kind of shook his head. He says, you know what? That's the way I was raised coming up as a supervisor. And he was maybe 10 years younger than me. But can't do that nowadays. Too many people, their feelings are going to get hurt. And I'm like, I told him, I said, I would have rather had you do that than me sit down and write that letter. That's how excruciating writing that letter was. I told him, I said, were my words sincere? I said, they sounded sincere. I wrote it the way they wanted me to write it so I could keep my job. But I told them the truth. I wasn't sincere on anything I said on that. And I wasn't sincere in even participating in that. And he kind of looked at me and he goes, wow, okay. And I said, I had a rapport with him. I said, you can do with that what you want. You can tell HR what you want. He said, no. He said, I'm just glad you're honest with me. And he says, I do feel the same way you do. But he says, our hands are tied. Human Resources has our hands tied. And I'm like, I said, it's a sad day in American manufacturing, where a worker doesn't get chewed out like he's supposed to, in my opinion, for doing something wrong that was totally my fault. No one made me late. I was late, and whenever I was there, though, I was a really good worker, and I was there all the time. It just sometimes, and we're talking like a minute. 3 times I was a minute tardy punching in. And I still had 15 minutes before my shift actually started because I had to go to my toolbox talks, my safety talks every day. So I was still 15 minutes before my shift started. But I was 1 minute late punching in 3 different times. It wasn't like I was 10, 15, 20 minutes late. It was like 1 minute, 3 different times. And then the one I did get excused was a 10 minutes. And the pharmacist had to write me an excuse saying we were here and we were trying to help him get this out because I needed my medicine that evening at work because I took my shots at work and everything. So, but it's funny to me how these snowflakes out there, especially at these graduations, are acting. And as far as I'm concerned, and I put this out on Twitter and everything, that anybody that walked out and didn't receive their diploma right there, because you're supposed to be excused from the commencement ahead of time, not right at the commencement, that what they should do, what the dean and the teacher should do there at Notre Dame, is take all those diplomas and put them in a safe space, for for a couple of weeks and then send them to him. I'm just saying, folks. All right, you hear the music, folks? That's the end of the show. My name's Dan Clements. I'm your constitutional warrior. Remember, if you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. Have a great rest of the day, folks, and God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow at noon.
Thank you for using Blog Talk Radio. Goodbye.